Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. My guest for this episode is David Baker-Hargrove, who is a leadership consultant, licensed psychotherapist, and former CEO of a 100 million plus nonprofit. With over 30 years of experience in behavioral health, LGBTQ plus advocacy, and crisis leadership, David specializes in helping executive teams align mission with infrastructure, navigate leadership transitions, and build cultures of trust and equity. Their work has also included disaster mental health leadership following the WTC attacks and the Pulse Nightclub shooting. David is a non-binary leader, proud spouse of 31 years, and parent to a daughter, bringing both lived experience and deep systems knowledge to every room they enter. Well, welcome, David, to this room here on Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. I shared a little bit about you personally in your bio, but is there anything you'd like to add to round yourself out as a host?
You hit all my bullet points. So I guess I have to say that I have two very big hobbies that kind of take up space in my brain when I'm not working. One is I discovered during the pandemic that I love to cook, and I really wanted to be a YouTube celebrity chef person, but I love to cook, but I hate to edit videos. So that didn't work out for me. But what I do love to edit is narrative fiction. And so I became a romantasy author, and I have published like 4 books, and I'm working on another series right now. And that is absolutely my passion. So I love it.
It's so cool. I'm so glad that you shared that. I love it. I'm always surprised, like people, not always surprised, but sometimes, people have very different passions that they do in addition to their wonderful work in the nonprofit space. That's awesome. All right, so let's talk nonprofits, nonprofit leaderships. You have a really strong background in mental health. So let's dive in and think about our CEOs out there. What are some of the hidden emotional challenges that you find CEOs face but often go unacknowledged?
Well, I think that we all have blind spots in terms of where we need, especially when we get into a leadership position. We tend to focus more on what the organization needs to grow, or what our staff needs to grow, or what our board needs to grow. But we don't often think about us personally. That kind of gets lost in the shadows. And we all have blind spots regarding where we need to grow. Hopefully we're never done growing, right? Both personally and professionally. But we don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. And the reality is that the more that we are able to grow in our leadership and our personal and professional expertise, then that lifts all the boats in the organization, right? Everybody benefits from that.
Yeah. So it's like so many nonprofit leaders, it's kind of like we're taking the servant leadership model a little too far and forgetting to serve ourselves as well.
I agree. I think that totally is something that can happen for all of us. It's an easy trap to fall into. When I have conversations with other nonprofit CEOs and executive directors, those are conversations that they're not going to bring up on their own. They'll talk about stress, kind of the really logistical kinds of issues that we all face, and how I'm trying to manage all the hats in the air and everything at once, but not really about, well, what does that do to you inside? And how does that have blind spots that you're not seeing?
Yeah. I hear that when I'm coaching clients, when they start to say things like, my kids are saying like, you're not home enough or you're always late for dinner, right? That's somebody else in their family sharing that blind spot. I'm thinking of a client I had who was like, Sarah, like being a nonprofit CEO kind of like sucks. I kind of don't really like a bunch of parts of my job. And I was like, you're the CEO, make the job one you like and delegate the other stuff. And I know that was like huge for her to just be like, oh, I can make it a job I like. I'm wondering if you have any stories or examples from your extensive experience of helping somebody see their blind spots and make their job better for themselves.
Well, I guess probably the best example is to kind of talk about myself, because that kind of it sticks with me, I think, more than some of the other work that I've done. But we become leaders based upon the leaders that we have while we're moving up the organizational chain or the organizational structure. And we talk so much about leadership, but where do we really learn how to be great leaders? We talk a lot about servant leadership, but how do we really learn what that means? Most of it's by example. And unfortunately, a lot of it isn't really great examples. And so we kind of take what we feel like works or we end up just mimicking stuff that we don't know whether it works or not. We just do it. And
Yeah.
for me, I had a lot of blind spots in terms of how I interact with people that report to me. I had a lot of blind spots in terms of what does it mean to be a leader and how do you be intentional every time about the things that you say and the things that you do, because not realizing that people are watching me and listening to me. And I'm thinking nobody cares about what I say. Nobody cares about what I do. And then when I say things that, could be inappropriate, or I do something that isn't really within, the context of what this culture is I'm trying to build, if I'm not acting in alignment, which happened, early to me a lot. And I had to really learn, I had to take a lot of stock about that. And I think, some of my examples that I can think of in my past are really severe, which I won't go into, but it were hard learning lessons, right? But I think that in some small ways that can happen for every leader, where you get so distracted by the noise that you don't remember to take a look and see how well you're aligned with the culture and the organization that you've been charged with or that you're trying to build.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so key, like alignment in our organizations, in any business. If you don't have alignment between the staff and the organization or the organization's mission and the program, things deteriorate fast in my experience. And on the board level too, I know you have some board experience as well. Another issue I've seen CEOs face a lot is, especially newer, navigating power dynamics, role clarity. I recently had an organization come to me. They might actually be having some actual leadership challenges with the CEO, but the board doesn't feel comfortable with addressing them. They'd rather like clarify roles, and they think that that might help. I'm not so convinced. But I'm wondering what your thoughts and advice are for people in recognizing and addressing relationships and power dynamics.
Well, definitely communication is key, because I have found certainly in work with clients and in my own professional that things get misinterpreted very easily and you don't know it until you're way down, further downstream, and it's already created an issue. Obviously, I'm not familiar with your particular situation, but I'd say in general, I do agree with routine visits for role clarification. In my last CEO position, we had a policy where at least once a year, all of the job descriptions of our employees were reviewed with them. Do you still do this? Is this still what you do? Is there anything that I'm thinking that you should be doing that just kind of fell off to the wayside? Because, another thing that is really problematic for confusion and adds to relationship issues is when positions roll and I think there's an expectation that knowledge transfer is 100%. No, it's not. Not even close. Not even close. And that was a big eye opener for me too. That you have two people down the line from, this other person that was two people ago. And they're doing something completely different than what you think they're doing.
Yeah, so true. And I completely agree with, regularly reviewing roles, job descriptions, right? Should be evolving. People's roles should be evolving. What their daily tasks should evolve over time. And we need to have clarity around that if we're going to work together well as a team.
Mm.
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think too, that communication thing is so important when roles change. Like I always like to say, that, like no two people are alike. We're each unique. We have unique histories, experiences, and we need to honor that, take all the good stuff that people are unique and not kind of pretend that, like if you leave your position, like if David leaves, like it's not going to be the exact David who's going to replace this role, right? It's going to be somebody else with a slightly different way of understanding and communicating. And we need to now create a role for them that meets their unique strengths and
Mhm.
supports them. Yeah. So, and then that brings us back to that alignment piece too. Where do you see specifically, CEOs needing support navigating that relationship with their boards, which I hear over and over again?
I think it's probably one of the biggest issues that faces the nonprofit sector is the ever going, never ending issue about the dynamic between board and executive staff and where's the line and, what is stepping into operations versus, well, I'm charged with the oversight and governance of the organization. It's a really tough. And most people don't get it. And I mean, I've probably worked with 20 different organizations plus, experienced a few myself. And I don't think I've ever encountered a situation where the CEO said, oh, yeah, I mean, us and the board, we're just awesome. There's always issues and it's always
Yeah.
so delicate, you know? And so that's kind of when I put on my therapy and I come up with the premise, we can't change other people. If people come to me in therapy and they're having issues with someone in their life, the first thing we have to agree on is you're not going to change them. So
Yeah.
what can you do instead? And we look for other avenues to maybe different ways of responding to situations because, you may not be able to change other people, but if you change your response to a situation, that may change the trajectory or the outcome of the dynamic. It's hard. It's really hard. And with therapy, a lot of times, unless I'm doing couples therapy, most of those conversations are one-sided, and it's very difficult. And I really feel for any leader in this position that is struggling with, I have issues with the board collectively or, individual members that I don't know how to manage it so that the organization runs more effectively the way it should.
Yeah. And what do you advise them to do in those situations?
Well, like I said, we'll take a look at the situation and we'll look at, okay, so how have you been responding? How have you been reacting? What are some alternative ways that you might create different kinds of conversations?
Yeah.
And sometimes, and I've encountered a lot of situations where the CEO looks at me, I can't do that. I don't feel
Yeah.
comfortable. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, I get it. I get it and I support it. Although we have to kind of understand that if we're not comfortable about trying to take a different approach, we're not likely to get any change. It's not going to change
Yeah.
everything. You
Yeah.
know, a dynamic between people is set and it runs the way the way it has evolved or what has become. And if you don't interject change into it, then you're not going to get change. And I get it. It's so hard for people and it's scary. You're talking about your job and your livelihood and you don't want to create those kinds of waves sometimes. And even if it seems professional, that doesn't necessarily mean it will be accepted professionally. It's really difficult. So we do what we can, right? We do what we can.
Yeah. I've seen that a lot. I've seen a number of executive directors, CEOs come to a place where the actions that are in integrity for them to do as an organization, the board doesn't understand them yet. But they also, because nonprofit people especially tend to be heart driven, oftentimes people pleasers.
Mhm.
They want to people please their board. But to people please their board would mean they'd need to be out of integrity with what's right for the organization, what they know is right. And we've had a lot of conversations, usually from my end. I'm not the therapist, I'm the business consultant. So I'm saying your job is to do what's right for the organization, no matter what. But usually what I've seen from an emotional perspective is even though it is scary to stop people pleasing, it feels good to stand in integrity, and it usually has a positive result. But the board could fire you if you really aren't in alignment, and that is a really uncomfortable place to be. But for many, and like you, right? Like some people don't want to do it, but I found many executive directors, if they really think through, they'd rather be fired in professional integrity than to stay and have that eroded. But that's a really hard place to be. I really feel for that.
Yeah, and I appreciate your different viewpoint because it is true. And, all transparency, it did happen to me. I was a founder of an organization. I was not in the board. So this is a fact, right? That inevitably at some point, it could be 1, 5, 200 years, the board and the founder are going to misalign.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always going to happen.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened to me. And it is exactly what happened to me. And so it ended up with my being discharged because we were not in alignment. I wasn't ready, but it is what it is at this point.
You are those things. And yet, doing my own kind of deep dive into this problem with boards, what I kind of came to the conclusion after researching 350 years of board history is that the reason why that misalignment can create really uncomfortable and unfortunate outcomes like you had is because the law disproportionately empowers the board.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because of a whole dynamic that happened with like the Puritans who were settling what would become the United States, which we don't have to go into now, but it was literally set up to empower the board. I don't think that is a great system. I don't think it's the most effective system, but it is the system we have. Mm-hmm. And it means that we are prone, when we have a set of board members who aren't maybe in alignment with each other or the mission, they have the ability, they have the legal authority to pretty much do whatever they want. And there isn't a lot of accountability above the board to say, you better do what's in the best interest of the organization. There isn't a lot of pressure on that other than the pressure they create for themselves. So it's a challenging dynamic. And I'm only sharing that mostly to tell everyone out there, if you're in this dynamic, it might, it's not just your fault. It happens again and again, right? And sometimes it's unavoidable.
Too true. It happens over and over and over again. And I would add to your people know, that it's not probably just them, that it's very common. But I would say that I would also add to that I don't think that this is something that most people should even try to fix on their own because it becomes too complex. This is the part where you really, really have to try to bring in a consultant like you, or, someone with therapy background like me to kind of work through the conversations. It's really, I think it's too daunting for most people to try to capture on their own if they want to turn it around and make it a success.
100% agree. It's just like, you can't see your own blind spots that easily. I mean, you could put in like a ton of work to see your own blind spots, or you could hire somebody who can help you see those blind spots much more quickly and in a way that is more productive and is a little faster. Because if you want to work through it, you might need to work through it a little faster with some help. And
100%.
yeah, and
a perfect case in point, right? Because I thought, well, why would I need someone to come in and mediate for me? I'm a therapist, I have all these years of experience. I know exactly the situation. I know exactly what needs to be done. But I couldn't see my own blind spots.
That's right. And even once you know your blind spots, I don't join boards anymore, but I've been on several boards. And like, even though, the last board I was on, I was already, a professional consultant. When I have the job as being the consultant with the board, they listen to me in a way that makes facilitating change easier.
Mhm.
When I'm on the board, same expertise, same person, all of a sudden, what I say, my expertise is not weighted in that way, and it becomes much less effective. So there is the power of just an outside person is
Yeah.
huge as well.
So true. So true.
Yeah. I want to dive a little more into mental health. And I'm wondering if you can speak to building, not just thinking about burnout for CEOs, but how do we build a culture, way of operating into our organizations that supports and grows people from a mental health perspective?
Wow. That's so much to talk about there.
We and
So I can tell you what some of the things that I did in my last leadership position is that it might be a little avant-garde for people, but I found it to be very effective. And so I created a program that I called Culture Club, and I broke the organization up into 4 groups, 62 people. And I would meet with each group for 1 hour a month. It would be on like a Friday before lunch. And so we did several different things. One thing we did was we did a book club. And so we read the 4 agreements. One other book that we read was The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. I also created kind of in between the books, the book clubs as we would do like team building, but it was stuff that I could that I curated from the internet and stuff, not like trust falls and walking on ropes. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I wanted to do something that I felt would be more intentional to this group, to this staff, right? And that really worked so well. There were no titles in the room. We were all on the same page when we had when we had these meetings. And, and the other thing, I think I'm just going to circle back to like role clarity. And we really put a very strong guardrails on certain types of behavior that are very common in the workplace. Like, we shut down gossip every time we heard it. This was a very competitive market that we were in our local area. And so I refused to allow people to talk badly about our peers or our competitor organizations. We don't do that. So trying to create, a positive language that rolls over and over and over again. And I will tell you, when I left that position, which oddly enough was the position I got discharged from, is that out of 62 people, an independent survey came asking, how do you feel aligned with the mission of this organization? And 62 people rated themselves 5 out of 5.
Nice. Yeah. I love not all, but I love many of the avant-garde ideas because I think we don't hear enough variety of examples, especially in the nonprofit world. If you hop over to the for-profit space, and actually I'm seeing a book, I think I have it here. This is a for-profit book called An Everyone Culture, Becoming a Deliberately Developmental Organization. It's a study basically of how the top for-profit companies do things like you were just describing, and they take it even farther. I mean, stuff you never even imagined. Let's go to read the book. I recommend reading this book.
Great.
They're doing this stuff, right? They're doing all sorts of fascinating things because they have really recognized that growing people and instilling, for lack of a better term, a high performance culture, a
Mhm.
wellness culture.
Yep.
Wellness is, I believe, part of high performance, makes a difference. And I love that you brought up behaviors, right? I often talk with my clients about creating a set of guiding principles as opposed to core values, because values are like a mesh I've found of beliefs and decisions about how we're going to behave. And I think for the most part, our organizations, we need a clear set of how we're going to behave. And then kind of going back to what you said earlier about like, we're not going to change people. So if we know how we want people to behave, and we're all in agreement on that, then you can avoid hiring people who don't want to behave that way, right? And we don't want to be in the position of managing by trying to like change the way they want to live their life, right? We can build an organization where, not everything in people's lives, but the basics about how we show up to work are all agreed upon, right? We're not going to talk, like you said, we're not going to talk badly about our competitive organization. These things build community in my experience, and they're so important. I love how explicit your example is about like how to do those things.
Can
Yeah.
I share another one with you?
Please.
So another policy we had, it was unwritten. It was something that I did with the senior leadership team. We had, if you remember back from Friends in the 90s, we had a hug and roll policy. And so we would sit about at least once a quarter. We would, in our leadership team meeting, our senior leadership team meeting, me and the CEO, COO, and then 6 directors. And we would go around and say to everyone in your departments, who are the people that are the pain points, right? Because of what you're talking about in terms of the behaviors, not necessarily fitting in with the culture we want to develop. And so then we go, okay, so who do we think that we can hug in, and who do we think we need to roll out?
I love that.
And if we're going to try to hug them in, what are we going to do specifically to try to make that happen? And how much time are we going to give ourselves before we make the decision to roll out? And that worked really well. And that really started again from one of my blind spots, because I was always thinking anyone who was acting against the culture of the organization, well, let me turn them around. Well, let me turn them around. Well, let me turn them around. Well, sometimes people just don't fit, and it's not a judgment. It's just the way it is. And
Yeah.
had to learn that by having that original kind of viewpoint, I was hurting the organization because they were acting in ways that were against the mission and the culture I was trying to build. And so I had to be able to take a hard look at that. And then all the directors kind of helped me along with it. But, the hug and roll thing, I think it's a little cute.
Yeah, I love the hug and roll so much, because it also captures, right? Sometimes people don't act in alignment because they don't feel safe to do so. Whether maybe it's the way you're showing up in the room, maybe they just were told their whole life, like, you don't do that at work. And so, or maybe, we have lots of people who've been, I'm a woman, so there's like, I've been in many rooms where, like, the women, you get talked over or talked down
Mhm.
to, or I'll never forget, I was like in this big conference room. I got there early. I was the head honcho, the executive director, and then our offices were in a corporation. And so the corporate executive director hadn't showed up yet. We were listening to an insurance presentation, and the insurance guy comes and he said, "Can you make some copies of these?" And I'm like, I don't even know how to use the copier, but my assistant he's over there, and you could ask him. I'm like, I'm secretary, right? You just assumed. And by the way, I'm the one making the decision in my head. Of course, the rest of the dialogue went, by the way, I'm making the decision, and we're not hiring you based off that interaction. Later, he said the girls in my office, and I was like, yeah, definitely out for me. So I don't hire people who hire children, was how I later learned to say it in my head. But, it's like that
Mhm.
left of sexism, like, I'm just not going to participate. Like, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to, not change him necessarily, but I'm not going to invite that into my organization. But sometimes on the other end of that, you might have the woman, I'll use the same example, who is always getting talked over and just isn't used to speaking up, and they need the hugging, right? They need to be encouraged, but it's within them already to want to speak up. They're just not doing it yet.
Mhm.
So love that, the hug and roll. It's got both sides in there really nicely.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we are like blasting through our time here, but I do have one more question for you, especially as you've taken on a role in disaster mental health leadership. And I do think whether, it's a disaster that's very obvious, like a shooting that the outside world can see, or I'm thinking about a client of mine who runs a society, and she's the CEO, but they took in a huge number of animals. They had to rescue a huge number of animals, and just supporting herself and her whole team with the emotional impact of witnessing a huge case of animal neglect. What have you found in those event-based mental health experience and support teams in getting through that? What do you think leaders need to know about those moments?
So I would encourage anyone who might find themselves accidentally in that kind of situation to even just do some peripheral research on a technique called critical incident stress debriefing. or CISD. Luckily we live in an age right now where you can get so much information from the internet that's accurate and is helpful. Also, your friendly AI can give you some tips on how to do that too. And if you are a person who feels comfortable and inclined to be able to manage that for your group, then that's great. And if not, then, looking up for someone in your local area who may be trained in CISD, that could be a therapist, it could be an advocate organization that focuses on mental health, any of those things really, but it's a very specific technique and it can be very helpful for these types of situations.
Yeah, I love that. I love, sometimes I think we assume complex issues have complex solutions. And so often complex issues can have straightforward solutions. Like you've just recommended a great tool and you can be trained in it, learn it, and implement it.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Before we close out here, if folks are listening and thinking, David has just the right mix for me, who should be reaching out to you and what's the best way for them to do that?
So I guess the easiest way is my website, which is, bhcassessment.com. And then hopefully would take you to my email. Although my email is Dr. David, Dr. David at bhcassessment.com. And so that's really the easiest way. And I'm all over the internet because I have a lot of places where I pasted profiles and stuff like that. It's easy to find me. So that's not difficult. You just Google my name, David Baker-Hargrove.
Well, we'll make sure we have those links and information in the show notes as well. David, thank you so much for being here. And thank you out there for listening and everything you do to make our communities better, healthier, safer, as well as the work you do to bring your team along, create a safe, aligned, healthy place to work in. One thing you could do to help your fellow colleagues as well is pass along this podcast, leave a review, like it wherever you're listening to it. You can either directly share it with a friend or you can do those little activities that boost the algorithm and help people who it will benefit find it. Until next time, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.